Hello everyone, Nancy here. I would love to share a few thoughts that I find helpful when playing the first variation on the theme in Paganini's 24th Caprice. From the get-go, you'll notice that this variation has the most similar rhythmic scheme to that of the theme, an emphatic downbeat followed by a reactive cluster of notes in each measure. To lend a sense of lightness and capriciousness, I find that flying staccato works best. For this bowing technique, there are 4 main participants involved in the execution. Number 1 is the active rotating forearm, whereby the biggest impulse is made on each down bow stroke. Number 2 is the active hand, which catches the string immediately after this initial down bow and proceeds to engage in a series of tremor-like motion in a supinating position. Number 3 is the inactive wrist, which juts out so slightly to create a pivot between the hand and forearm. And last is the inactive elbow, which when situated comfortably down, helps localize movement to the hand. Now the key is to find an appropriate balance between control of each tremor movement and allowing the natural springiness of the bow to do part of the job. I find it helpful to think of the hand as having 2 functions, giving the impulse and controlling the impact of that impulse, much like a shock absorber. Specifically, the fingers alternate between flexing and straightening. Now, to practice, I like to reimagine this variation, the 8th note triplets, as semi-quavers with 16th rests in between, like so. And you start up slowly and then you gradually pick up the speed. And this gives you a better sense of the catch and release action, which is very important in staccato and flying staccato, and harness control of the bow before and after each stroke. It also creates an opportunity for you to determine how elevated your elbow should be, especially during string crossings. Now, to bring out the musical interest and underlying harmonic rhythm in the variation, I find it helpful to experiment with different bow lengths, bow speed, sound points, different sound points, and also choice of fingerings. For example, in the penultimate measure of this variation, there's a tritone, F and B, and I personally opt to remain in the first position so that the different string qualities enhances the unsettled feeling of a tritone. Now, that said, at the same time, I also find it helpful to select fingerings based on, easy navigation of the left hand, where the left hand can move in blocks. Less jolts in the left hand ensure smoother bow movements. So, all right then, I hope these thoughts help you as you tackle the first variation.
I know we're probably not supposed to play favorites, so don't tell the others, but Variation 10 is definitely my favorite. It seems to me like a kind of oasis amidst a really chaotic desert of activity. It's a moment to breathe, to play slowly, to play a melody really beautifully shimmery, all my favorite things to do on the violin anyway. So the way I would practice this, for those who have been in tutorials with me for the Benedetti sessions, know I love practicing intonation slowly, really finding the ring or halo around each note. So because this piece is in A minor, there are a lot of A's and E's, perfect opportunity to really listen for the resonance of the instrument itself. So I should mention that actually even to find the first note of Variation 10, it's pretty tricky. We're coming from a Pitz or left hand. So I use the E, the harmonic there, as my guide. Not only because it makes it easier for me to find the A, which is a fourth up, but I'm going to play the E directly after the A. Breathing is the name of the game for me here, so I always take a nice slow breath before I start. And then to practice intonation, this is really just mapping out the fingerboard, figuring out how far each interval is from one another. How it feels to reach a sixth. Where I have to space my fingers in order to make all those half steps. Where notes are across the strings in relation to each other. There's a lot of sort of grid-like work that I do in my mind even. You can even do it away from the instrument, really mapping out the distance between each finger. And then of course the ears also have to be super involved, really listening for that shine, that shimmer around every note to make sure it's perfectly in tune. Then fingerings and bowings here, obviously totally subjective. I like to, because this is such a free, floaty variation, I like to take more bows than what is written, but first practice it making sure you can fit all of them in one bow, and then with that sound in mind, you can free it up if you need to, at least I think. I really like a floaty, ethereal sound here, so I find that a bit more bow and a bit faster bow speed helps me achieve that. And then lastly, fingerings. I think some would go for the approach of having this variation be quite clean, but I find it very operatic, very melodic, so I like to have a little fun with it. Rather than going across the strings, I tend to come down. It also gives me a chance to breathe in between each phrase, and then at the end, I think it should be expressive. So I like to slide. Maybe you prefer a slightly cleaner approach, but experiment, try a few things, see what works, and then always remember that the violin, you can map it out in whatever way feels comfortable for your hand. So really get familiar with the fingerboard, get familiar with the bow, how much bow you want to use, and then the world is your oyster. This is such a fun, expressive variation, so really make it operatic.